am calling this board meeting to order. The Orange County Schools Board of Education pledges to our families, students, staff, and the greater community to conduct our business in a courteous and productive manner, showing respect for fellow board members, staff, and citizens. The board asks its citizens to conduct themselves with the same courtesy towards all staff members and each other. As per board policy, Robert's Rules of Order will be used to conduct meetings, and a moment of silence will be observed before we begin our business. Public comment will be held after the board adopts tonight's agenda. Tonight, as we come together for our only scheduled November board meeting, I will start by acknowledging that Orange County Schools educates our students on the traditional land of the Occaneechi Band of the Saponi Nation. November is Native American Heritage Month, observed each year to honor the rich and diverse cultures, traditions, and histories, and to acknowledge the important contributions of Native peoples. The Orange County School Board is grateful for the contributions of our Indigenous students, teachers, staff, and community members, and honor the legacy you each represent. I encourage folks to visit the Orange County Historical Museum virtually at orangehistorync.org this month to check out the new exhibit, Yasa, Journeys of the Occaneechi. Within the virtual exhibit, you can explore the physical and cultural journeys made by the Occaneechi over time. Learn the reasons they journeyed, where they went, how their lives changed, and how their traditions and values endured. And so, as we offer gratitude for the past and also look ahead to consider our individual roles in helping to meet the needs of every student and family in our district, we will have a moment of silence before we begin our work. Thank you so much. We will now have some recognitions, and I will begin by recognizing Vice Chair Brenda Stevens, who made Orange County Schools very proud at the North Carolina School Boards Association conference last week by being awarded the Raleigh Dingman Award. This is the highest honor bestowed on a North Carolina school board member each year, and only one board member in North Carolina wins it every year. Congratulations, and thank you for your exemplary leadership through the years, Madam Vice Chair. And now we will have a few other recognitions from our staff.
Thank you, and good evening, Chair McKenzie, Vice Chair, and congratulations, Vice Chair Stevens, and to the entire board, staff, students, and families. Next slide, please. So tonight, I'm delighted to share several recognitions. First, I want to recognize and thank all of our teachers, our bus drivers, our teaching assistants, our child nutrition services workers, custodians, office assistants, and administrators on the excellent work they are doing to ensure equity, excellence, and access for all of our students every day. While we remain in unprecedented and challenging times, they are not allowing the pandemic to halt the district's goal of improving outcomes for students. We are reminded in November to give thanks and to show our gratitude. So thank you, Orange County Schools team, for your continued amazing work for our students. I thank you. I appreciate you, and I applaud each and every one of you. Thank you. All right, next slide, please. So there are two important events happening in the month of November. One of them you've heard about already, and that is Native American Heritage Month. And you'll hear a little bit more about that in just a few moments, but November is both North Carolina Career Development Month. How many of you knew that? As noted by the proclamation from Governor Cooper on this slide. And again, it's also Native American Heritage Month. So in honor of Career Development Month, on November 18th, which is Career Development Day, I will be giving out two career development coordinators, Nick Montgomery at Orange High and Stephanie Smith at Cedar Ridge High, a certificate of appreciation on behalf of the district. As career development coordinators, Mr. Montgomery and Mrs. Smith work with all students to create career development plans. They help supervise all internships, and they work collaboratively with all stakeholders to ensure the delivery of career development services for our students. So, Mr. Montgomery and Ms. Smith should expect a knock on their door on the 18th to receive a certificate that reads as follows. Certificate of Recognition awarded to Nick Montgomery, Stephanie Smith, for dedicated service to North Carolina Career and Technical Education, also known as CTE, students, in support of their career development and the observance of Career Development Month during November 2020 and Career Development Coordinator Day on November 18th, 2020. Thank you, and a round of applause to both of you on the job well done. All right. And so there's more. Next slide, please. So as stated earlier, November is Native American Heritage Month. In Orange County schools, we are working to ensure accurate historical representation of Native Americans and to celebrate their tremendous contributions to this country. Dr. Dina Keeling, our Chief Equity Officer, will share how the district is recognizing Native American Heritage Month. Dr. Keeling will also help us celebrate 8th grade science teacher and equity lead at CW Stanford, and that's Mr. Jeffrey Faulkner. Mr. Faulkner put advancing equity for students, and students of color in particular, as one of the top priorities in his personal development plan for this year. So tonight, we want to recognize him for the equity work he is effectively leading at his school and share why he was selected as this month's Orange County Schools Equity Warrior. Dr. Keeling.
Good evening, board. Good evening to all. I'll start with Native American Heritage Month. As Dr. Felder just stated, our district-wide goal is to ensure the accurate historical representation of Native Americans. And the best way to do this is to elevate the narratives and perspectives of Indigenous people. Teachers have been provided with a number of resources which do just that. Staff has already begun to collaborate and share resources, and students have already asked for the inclusion of an Indigenous Studies course. So I will be sure to keep the board updated and the public updated on the ways that we recognize our Native American community throughout OCS this month. Next slide. Our school equity leads have been doing a great job keeping equity at the forefront in their schools. Almost immediately after our first equity leads meeting, Mr. Faulkner began sharing articles and facilitating discussions with the staff and school-based equity team at CW Stanford on equity-related topics, including segregation in gifted education and the Racial Equity Institute's Groundwater Approach. For those who are not familiar, the Groundwater Approach illustrates the systemic nature of racism and pushes the reader to reflect on the thought that if you walk along a pier and one fish is floating belly up in the lake, you might ask what's wrong with the fish. But if you come upon that lake and half the fish are floating belly up, you'd question what's wrong with the lake. Now imagine the lake is the educational system and half the students are failing. In the words of Mr. Faulkner, this is the time for us to do a reset on practices that we're doing to satisfy our conscience as opposed to healing our community. In addition to the reflective discussions he facilitates with staff, Mr. Faulkner is a culturally responsive teacher, highlighting the work of Hispanic scientists as part of his lessons and recognizing Indigenous Peoples Day. And his enthusiasm is contagious, leading 2 members of the CW Stanford staff to ask if they too could join us in our equity lead meetings. I could go on about the ways that Mr. Faulkner is leading with equity, but I'll stop there and encourage everyone to read his full write-up on the OCS website and social media. Congratulations, Mr. Faulkner, for being this and our first so far OCS review. Thank Thank you. Dr.
Is that
Felder?
is that all of our recognitions this evening, Dr. Felder?
Yes, Madam Chair, it is.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you to everyone. So the next item on the agenda is actually agenda adoption. Do I have a motion to approve tonight's agenda with an addition of an item J to discuss Dr. Felder's contract extension?
And the modified.
And, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you've got the motion. I'll second it when you get done.
Yeah, no, go on, Will.
And to modify the personnel report as discussed in closed session. I have a motion from Ms. Stevens and a second from Mr. Atherton. Does that work for everyone? Okay.
I'm too
kind. Okay, Ms. Doyle?
Yes.
Ms. Hauser?
Yes.
I vote yes. Ms. Moore?
Yes.
Ms. Smiley?
Yes.
Ms. Stevens?
Yes.
Mr. Atherton?
Yes.
Fantastic. We have approved our agenda and we'll have an item J. Ms. Stowe, I just want to confirm with you that there are no public comments this evening. Is that correct?
Good evening. That is correct.
Fantastic. Thank you. Just a reminder to the community, if you have comments for us, you're always welcome to email. Do I have a motion to adopt tonight's consent agenda?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Second.
I have a motion from Ms. Stevens and a second for Mr. Atherton. Ms. Smiley?
Yes.
Ms. Stevens? Mr. Atherton?
Yes.
Ms. Doyle?
Yes.
Ms. Hauser?
Yes.
Was that, oh, she seems to be buffering. Yes. Okay. I vote yes. Ms. Moore?
Yes.
Okay. The consent agenda unanimously passes. So now we will move on to our action item, which is air purifiers. Dr. Felder, will you walking us through that?
So I am actually going to ask Ms. Sarah Pitts, Director for Safety and Environmental Health, to lead us through the discussion of air purifiers. So Mrs. Pitts.
So first, let me say good evening, board members. Good evening, OCS staff, Dr. Felder, and the public who is viewing. Tonight, I get to present on the recommendation of purchase of air purifiers as a result of COVID-19 and our continual search to keep all of our spaces safe as staff and students are returning. We want to make sure that everything is healthy. So previously, the district reviewed the guidelines for HVAC, and we compared them to the NCDHHS Strong Schools Guidelines and the DPI Lighting the Way documents, and both recommended increasing circulation and the amount of fresh air for your HVAC systems. So I just want to state that an audit was conducted on all of our systems, and our HVAC systems have been inspected district-wide, and they were all found to meet industry standards for their particular models and building codes, and all bring in fresh air. So the board had concerns regarding the HVAC units, and again, the ability to install the MERV filters. And as a result of that, the operations team previously recommended the purchase of 503 air purifiers, which would be one in each classroom based on the concerns. And on October 12th, the board approved the funding in the amount of $50,000 to purchase air purifiers for the classrooms that we knew may have compliance issues with masks or sick kids being present in them. So we have gone through with the purchase of the air purifiers for all of the EC classrooms, for the pre-K classrooms, for the isolation or the care rooms, and the nurses stations for all buildings. On the 26th, we discussed conducting an assessment of all the classrooms in the remaining buildings. And we looked at those classrooms based on the airflow. We looked at them based on the ability to have ducted conditioned air as a result of the HVAC unit. And we looked at them based on the ability for the units to actually be turned off or on, because some of our units have the ability to be turned off in the classroom. And because of COVID, we want to ensure that the models are running all of the time. So based on that, we came back with the recommendation of, I believe, 53 air purifiers to be placed in Cameron Park, Hillsborough Elementary, and Orange High, based on the fact that those classrooms may not have a ducted air supply and conditioned return air, and their airflow may not be as high as other classrooms. So at that point, we would recommend, or at this point, we recommend the purchase of the air purifiers in those classrooms, just because it would help increase the rate of the air exchange. If the board approves to take action on this and go forth, that will be at a cost of $22,000. Previously, we had recommended also the purchase of air scrubbers for the band rooms and the chorus rooms in the high schools. And at this point, we are going to pull back that recommendation as we have assessed the situation and looked at the concerns again. And we are going to say that if band and chorus are to occur, our recommendation is going to be that those occur outside due to the increase of aerosolization because of the activity that occurs in those classrooms. So again, we are not recommending at this point the ability to purchase air scrubbers to go in those spaces. It may be assessed later when they come back under, Plan A, if need be, but the market for air scrubbers is still readily available, whereas air purifiers are becoming a little more difficult to obtain. So at this point, the Operations Department recommends the purchase of 53 additional air purifiers to be placed in the classrooms that we have identified in Cameron Park, Hillsborough, and Orange High. Are there any additional questions for me this evening?
Ms. Smiley?
Thank you. And I'm glad we were able to get those other ones out. And thanks, Ms. Pitts, for all of your work on this. So in this assessment of the systems, were we able to determine the number of air changes per hour in our classrooms?
No, we were not. That will actually require a engineer to come in and take a look at those spaces. We can give you that information based on the specs from the original model, but we know that given the equipment, that may have changed over the years.
So like as the equipment ages or something, it may not quite. Okay, that's helpful. I do not know a lot about HVAC units. So here's, my concern is that I'll just tell you what my belief is. My belief is if we cannot measure the number of air changes per hour in our classrooms, we should assume that we are typical of American schools and have 1.5 air changes per hour in our classrooms. And the guidance that I have seen suggests that districts aim for 5 or ideally 6 air changes per hour in all of our spaces. And so in the absence of more information about our specifics, I believe we should put air purifiers in all of our spaces according to the original recommendation from operations. So that's not a question. That's just given the information that I have, I don't believe that it is sufficient in terms of the level of certainty that we have that, if you think of the metaphor about COVID prevention as the lasagna, I don't think we know that the ventilation layer of the lasagna is strong enough in our district unless we do that.
Thank you, Ms. Smiley. I will go ahead and throw out there that I wholeheartedly agree with you and think, we have, I'm not sure if this was something passed around through the board or something I read somewhere else, but an article that was discussing the correlation between clean air and student achievement. And it just makes me think we have nothing to lose by having the cleanest air possible that we can buy, basically, in this district, especially during a pandemic. Other board members, thoughts? Ms. Doyle?
Thank you, Ms. Pitts, for that update. And so I'm just thinking of how we started with the 500. We did the what was roughly 3 per building or something like that, the 50,000. And now we're kind of back to something closer to the original recommendation, which was 500. And I'm just thinking the rationale for being back to that, aside from what Ms. Smiley and Ms. McKenzie just said, is in the interim, we were trying to figure out if there was a way to assess more precisely which, how many of those 500 rooms actually needed an air purifier. And it's like we're coming to the conclusion that we can't accurately assess. I'm just verbalizing this for my own processing is what I'm doing here, that we can't effectively assess the air changes per hour. So we're thinking that the suggestion here is that we would be better to err on the side of caution. Is that correct?
Yeah, what we're saying is the ability to assess the air changes is out of the scope of what our staff would have the ability to do. So if that is the case, it would require bringing in an engineer to take a look at that for us. And yes, what we would be recommending is based on our systems. Some of our buildings have newer systems, some of them have ventilated air, some of them are continually running, even if the AC and the heat aren't on. We're recommending the purchase of 53 for those classrooms that have an air handler, that the teacher could physically shut it off to ensure that we have circulation that's going on in those classrooms, even if the air handler happens to be turned on.
So Mrs. Pitts, may I ask, what would be the time frame on getting that assessment done? Is that something is it a long process? I'm wondering if we have that information first and then make a decision whether more air purifiers are needed. But that would depend on how quickly we can get that assessment done.
We would have to bring in potentially an engineer to look at give us a cost of what it would be for the assessment itself, and then look at putting out an RFP dependent on cost to get the engineer in to do the work. So it's not going to be a quick turnaround in order to get them in and for them to thoroughly inspect our systems. Part of them have been done with SUD and the upgrade that we are going through in the next 5 years, but it would be bringing someone in to take a look and physically tear apart and check out every unit.
And just for clarity, we don't know the rate of exchange on any of our systems. I'm just wondering about the newer systems. Do we know? Or
I do not. I can ask the operations team and maintenance to see if they have those manuals, but right now I do not have that information, but I can look and get back to you.
Thank you.
Ms. McKenzie, I think you called on me, but you were on mute. Is it okay if I go?
Sorry, yes, please.
Okay.
And then Ms. Hauser.
Okay. Yeah, I guess what I thought when we did that initial approval, it was because people were coming into the building very soon. And then when we were going to go back and do sort of a more, look and consider whether we truly need for all 500 classrooms, I guess, my expectation was that maybe around that margins, we'd say in this one particular school, we have a brand new system. We know exactly what it can do. And we feel good that like this building or this hallway of this building doesn't need something. And so I guess that, so this is sort of at the other end of that. And I'm erring on the side of, it would take us a while and be expensive to do the full engineering estimate. And as Ms. Pitt said, the market on these is tightening. If we installed them, likely we'd have fewer kids with symptoms because of asthma and all kinds of other things. And like, why wouldn't we, if we have the money in fund balance, why wouldn't we invest in this now as sort of a near-term solution?
Thoughts from other board members? Dr. Felder, how do you feel about? Oh, Ms. Hauser, yes.
Oh, I didn't know if you wanted to respond to Sarah's comment first.
Oh, no, go ahead. I'm sorry, I had.
I'll go ahead. And
Yes.
I first have a question for Sarah, and that's what about spaces other than classrooms? There are offices, shared offices. Some of them are really closets that have been converted to offices that don't have good ventilation. And what about those spaces and making those safer for our people that are working in them?
Yep. Yeah, we discussed that in the last meeting, and I do think that's another really important thing is considering what are all of those spaces that might need it, and they might not need as substantial and costly of a unit as a classroom with a bigger square footage.
Yeah, I do know, like I said, Mr. Mincy went through and looked at all of our buildings and assessed what areas were being utilized. There were a couple of spaces that were not intended to be offices that had been used as offices, and the recommendation for those was to convert them back to their original intents and move the employees within them to another space which had proper ventilation to ensure that we could meet the recommendations for air circulation and fresh air. And at this point, like I said, the recommendation was, and I misspoke earlier, it was the purchase of 56 throughout the district based on those spaces that were not completely ducted and did not have newer units.
So just to clarify, so you're saying, are we going to be doing that? Are we moving people out of offices that are not really offices? Is that happening?
That has been the recommendation from the operations department. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Mr. Atherton?
So I know in the last meeting, we also talked about the filtration itself on the newer systems and some of the other systems about changing the MER level of each, and that some may or may not work. Do we know if we're able to put the filters or the better filters in the systems?
I do not, and I apologize for that. Is out due to a death in the family, and I wasn't able to obtain that information from him, but I can get that for you and put it in a board update.
Okay, and these 56, the 44K, does that include the filters that would be needed for the duration of the school year, or would it be in addition?
They would be in addition. The units that we are looking at right now have a 5-year filter life, and the life expectancy on the filter is from the day of purchase. So it would not benefit us to buy ahead of time, but they do prorate their filters if you have to buy within the 5-year span. It is a much lower cost, and they assured us that we would be able to get those.
Okay, thank you.
Other board members? Dr. Benjamin, if you are here, I would love to welcome you and also ask if you had an opinion to share about this discussion with air purifiers.
I think, thanks for asking. So there's data to present later on the success of public schools in North Carolina that you may want to consider prior to allocating substantial funds. I want to entwine two separate populations. Population number one is where you cannot enforce or have adherence to masking. In this group, all of the ventilation concerns and all of the potential solutions outside of masking and all those precautionary measures, they all come online, right? And different districts are going to deal with that in different ways, whether that's with air purifiers or educating children outside or opening windows, or the different districts will do all sorts of different things because you're not able to mask in that environment. If you're in an environment where people are fully capable of masking, which is the entire rest of the child and adult population in schools. There, the biggest challenge has been thus far what I would call, and will be quite likely moving forward, what I would call pandemic fatigue, where in the first few weeks or the first bit of the going back to school, adherence to masking and other efforts has been really, really successful, with extraordinarily low infections in school, to the point that infections in school in the mainstream curriculum are lower in schools than they are in the community at large. And whereas, and I'll get to these data later, whereas in typical North Carolina community, one infected person infects one or two other people, in the school setting, it appears that it takes 10 infected people on average to result in one additional infection inside North Carolina public schools. But the challenge tends to be adhering to that level of compliance around the 3 W's. And so if you haven't, there's no data thus far that when you're masking, that ventilation reduces infection. But there are data not only from very sparse from schools that you can get pandemic fatigue, and there's considerable data that long-term adherence to public health measures tends to wane over time. So if you're in a setting where you have a limited amount of resources to spend, many districts that have already had real success with very low infection rates, and you'll see some of those here tonight, many districts that have had that success are allocating their resources to ensure longer term adherence to masking, to distancing, to hand hygiene. Much like the way hospital systems have done for not only COVID-19, but also infection control practices in hospitals. So I don't have an opinion at all as to the relative value of cleaner air or better ventilation in Orange County schools or any other school for that matter. It's outside of my purview, outside of my swim lane here. But as it relates to COVID-19 infection, I would suggest before allocating large resources to decisions, you might look at some of the data that your peers have assembled from throughout the state and see their success, and then make some choices about what's right for Orange County schools. I like the fact that you're addressing the adapted curriculum. Different districts are addressing that in different ways. Several districts have chosen to address it exactly like you have. Other districts have addressed it in different ways. And then many districts are handling band and chorus, as was earlier recommended tonight. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That's helpful. So board, I think the question in front of us is whether we want to move forward with the additional purchase of 56 air purifiers for the identified classrooms from our operations department, or if we want to go ahead and approve a larger number than that, or if we want to come back to that conversation. Does anyone have thoughts around that? Ms. Hauser?
There's a conversation that with Dr. Benjamin here, he might have some comments. There's a related conversation, and that's around cleaning the vents in the schools. We have a report from a consultant that says the vents in the schools should be cleaned quarterly, and I don't know if that's being done. And if that's not being done, it would seem that that's important too. And and that's going to cost money too. So I don't know if we look at that separately, but I just wonder if we need to be planning to spend money to do that as well.
Ms. Pitts, is that something you would be able to speak to?
Yes, that is on our preventive maintenance for the classrooms, and it is to be done quarterly by the custodian. However, there are some high reach areas such as those in the media center, gymnasiums, that may not be done quarterly just because of the timing to get in the lift and get staff in to do those. But usually that is done in-house by our staff and not something that is handled by our contracted cleaning crew.
And do we know that that's being done? Because the consultant said that it was not being done.
I can verify that, and Dr. Kersey will be in this week to conduct his air sampling, and we will make sure that we follow up with the principals if we find out that it is not occurring. Yes.
Thank you.
Ms. Smiley?
Yes, and I want to thank Dr. Benjamin for sharing your expertise here, and certainly I believe that masking and physical distancing are the most clearest, most important preventative measures. But all of the guidance, CDC, state level, says increase the airflow if you can. And I think that in the absence of being able to measure those things, that we have a known way of doing that, which is purchasing these air filters, air purifiers, which we also know are correlated with better academic outcomes and fewer illnesses among staff and students. And so I am ready to approve spending money tonight on an air purifier for every space that needs one, according to the original recommendation. And I guess what I'm trying to ascertain is, does staff or does the district oppose that, or is that just yeah, I'm just trying to understand, are you opposed to that? If the board tonight said, yes, let's do that, is that not something you want us to do?
Dr. Felder, Dr. Dawson, Ms. Pitts?
So I will, I'll chime in here a little bit. I just want to be very clear, right, that the systems that we have in our district is adequate, and you're right, Ms. Smiley, it is adequate for our industry standard expectation of the amount of airflow that we need at the standard that it's supposed to be at. And yes, we've all read articles and we've shared them as to the value in increasing, right, ventilation. And again, going back to what Dr. Benjamin is saying is that, while that may be of some benefit, that is not like a key preventer of the spread of COVID. And if we're going to spend $550,000, is this the best way to keep our kids safe? And there isn't any real evidence to show that that is the best way to do that as far as preventing COVID spread in our schools. And we have schools that have been open with students attending since August, and the data doesn't show, right, that schools are areas of high infection. I do encourage our board to, yes, as far as the 56, because when we did assess the buildings, we did identify 56 spaces where, additional air purifier would help increase the airflow, especially because it's a ductless supply of air. And whatever we decide tonight, and of course it's up to the board to decide, and we will honor whatever you decide. The one thing that I do ask is, if it isn't the full decision to at least approve the 56 tonight, because the ordering, as you mentioned, Ms. Miley, of the ordering of these air filters and air purifiers, it's not that quick. So we do want to get those orders in as soon as possible to at least get the 56 in. And then even if you decide to go with the full 503 minus now, yes, 500, that just know that it's not going to be an immediate or very timely getting them into the district and into the classrooms, just because, as you stated, purchasing them, they are commodity. So whatever you decide, of course, is what we'll do. But based upon our analysis, what we are recommending at this time is the 56 4-hour classrooms that we identified in the 3 specific buildings based upon our analysis.
Dr. Dawson, could I ask you a follow-up question? You said something about $500,000, and it was my understanding that the units that we were considering were about $500 a piece. Is that right?
The 56 that we're recommending, yes, and the $550,000 quote is what I'm referring back to what Dr. Williams had presented to you when he initially presented the 503.
Those were, I think, different units though, because if we were going to buy 530, which I think is the number of classrooms we have, and they were $500 a piece, it would be $265,000, which I just think it's an important distinction as we have this conversation to understand what we're the dollars that we're talking about spending also. So could you, if we were to say we wanted to buy one for every classroom, model that you've recommended for these 56 classrooms be appropriate for all of the classrooms, or would we be talking about different models for some spaces?
No, that model would fit a standard classroom throughout all of our buildings.
Thank you, Ms. Pitts. That's helpful.
And is that model
Smiley?
a least expensive model, Ms. Pitts? Because I know that I think what was in that quote that was presented previous was on the high end.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, ma'am.
Smiley?
It's a effective model at a lower price.
So,
Ms. Pitts, this new model, what is it? And do you happen to know what I think it's called CFM is?
So they are Austin Air Healthmates. They will do approximately 400 CFM per minute on the high speed. And there are 3 speeds. So if it is on low, I believe it will turn over our standard classroom about 1.5 times an hour. If it is on high, it will be closer to the 3.
Mm-hmm. Great. And the sound, I know one of the trade-offs is decibel level as well in sound. Is it comparable to the other version, the other model that we agreed earlier?
Yes, it's absolutely comparable. It's done by the same vendor. So it will be almost like a fan is on in the classroom. It should not be any louder than that.
Great. Okay.
Ms. Hauser? Ms. Hauser? Can you guys hear me?
yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes, we can.
Okay. Dr. Felder?
Yes, I just wanted to weigh in a little bit. And so I know that this is a really tough decision. And so when I think about what the science says, I always, I go back to the science, and the science tells us that air purifiers have shown to be minimally effective. And when I also think about school districts, particularly school districts in North Carolina, I mean, there's school districts all over the country and all over the world that are open successfully and are found not to be super spreaders, et cetera. But when I think about, some of the districts here that are successful and are not using air purifiers, and now I don't know their rate of exchange, so would certainly want to investigate that, but I just would find it interesting if they're having success without them, you know, is that an investment that we want to make? And with regards to, I did read the report regarding the possible impact of, you know, cleaner air. I don't know if I'm getting a static or feedback. I don't know if a mic is open, but with regards to achievement, you know, I wish it were as easy as an air purifier, because I'd buy 5 of them, put them in every classroom. I would, but we know that there are lots of factors, right? Student achievement, there are lots of factors that go on that impact student achievement. And, you know, we know as educators that the physical plant certainly has an impact, but the research tells us that the number one impact is the teacher and the curriculum and the interaction between the teacher, the curriculum, and the students. So it's that what we call the instructional core. That's where the rubber meets the road on achievement. So I just wanted to share that. Of course, we will, you know, support whatever the decision the board makes, but I just wonder if, you know, those funds could be used to, you know, help us with some of the things that the other districts who have found success are doing. And that is around helping to ensure adherence to those 3 W's, because ultimately that's what will make the difference.
Ms. Hauser and then Ms. Smiley. Okay, I'm sorry, I thought you were raising your hand before. I just want to make sure you had your chance if you needed it. Ms. Smiley?
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more, Dr. Felder, about the other things being more important. My point was, I think air purifiers actually have multiple positive impacts. I mean, here's my concern. There have been 55 clusters in K-12 schools in North Carolina with over 450 cases. We are talking about, the CDC said the 15 minutes of exposure time is cumulative across the day. And in elementary school, you're going to be eating breakfast and then snack and then lunch. And I don't see how you do those things in 15 minutes a day. We've decided the tents to go outside are too expensive. What I'm trying to do is mitigate risk, right? Like I'm not saying the air purifiers are more important than the masking. I'm saying I actually do think that they are additive helpful. And I think that's why, you know, in the like risk mitigation lasagna, they're a piece of it. And so, you know, that's where I'm landing. I think it's clear in this meeting. It's been clear in other meetings. I think we should invest in this as a risk mitigation strategy. And I think we have the money to do it. So that's probably all I'll say about that.
So board, I do think that we need to be moving to our next topic. I know Dr. Benjamin is here and his time is very valuable. So I'm hoping that we can move to a motion. Mr. Atherton?
I'll make a motion to approve the 56 air purifiers based on the staff's recommendation.
I'm not hearing it. So, okay, we have a motion from Mr. Atherton and a second from Ms. Hauser. Ms. Smiley?
I'll vote yes.
Ms. Stevens?
Hesitantly, yes. I don't like spending all of that money.
It's just 56.
Mr. Atherton?
Right.
Yes.
Ms. Doyle?
Yes.
Ms. Hauser?
Yes. Yes.
I will vote. Yeah, I've got you. I will vote yes, but I think that we should discuss ordering more than that. Ms. Moore?
Yes.
And Ms. Smiley? Oh, I already
voted yes.
Yeah, you already got you. Then we have approved the 56 air purifiers, and we can always come back for more. Mr. Atherton?
Yeah, I was just going to say that as well is that we did ask about, can we get the volumes of the new systems, and they were going to look that up. We asked about the MER filters, were they able to put them in? So I think there's several things we asked to bring back to have this discussion again. So,
Ms. Smiley.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say, like, well, they already did the analysis of the MERV levels, and they've said they've put them up as high as they can without compromising the system, is my understanding. So that's why the air purifiers like are only option here. But happy to discuss again at some point.
Ms. Doyle.
I was wondering if we could hear a little bit more about why the air scrubbers got removed from the recommendation. And I know, Ms. Pitts, you said it was because it was with the idea of going outside, but after you explained that is when Dr. Benjamin mentioned that some other school districts are doing the air scrubbers. So I don't really know the difference between an air scrubber and an air purifier. So if we could have a little bit more context for why we think we might not do that, because I don't know that realistically we'd always be able to have band and chorus outside, although I'm a big fan of that. So just want a little bit more information.
Ms. Pitts, could I ask that we get this in a report form, because I do want to try to keep us on schedule tonight. Would that be okay with you, Ms. Doyle, if Ms. Pitts followed up?
Yes.
That way, okay. And we will circle back to this conversation at our next meeting if it's something that the board feels like we need to do.
Ms. McKenzie, I have a question.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, Ms. McKenzie, I just wanted to add one other thing for the report, and that's I would like follow people out of poorly ventilated spaces, and that in fact occurs. But if it doesn't occur, then we need to ventilate those spaces too. So just would like to know that that's happening.
Agreed.
And Ms. McKenzie, with the purchase of the 56, that will exceed the $50,000 that was originally by the board. So do we have the approval for this additional purchase?
Yes, I think that's what the vote was. Thank you so much, Ms. Pitts. Your expertise is always so valuable to us. All right, well, we will move on to our next topic, and that is protocols and procedures that will be followed during attestation and screening for symptoms when there is a confirmed case and or if clusters occur. I'd like to welcome back Dr. Benjamin. Thank you so much for being here tonight, and I will turn it over to Dr. Felder and to you.
Well, thank you so much, Chair McKenzie. So despite the pandemic, we continue to focus on access, equity, and excellence in all that we do. I've said it before and will continue to say it, that as educators, we know that there's no substitute for in-person learning. As a result, since the onset of the pandemic, which was 8 months ago, I know, it seems like 80 years ago. Our goal in Orange County schools has always been a safe return to in-person instruction. On October 26, 49 EC separate settings and pre-K students returned to school for in-person instruction. I want to once again thank the board, every EC pre-K teacher, bus driver, bus assistants, principals, TAs, child nutrition services workers, central office staff, as well as our community partners, the Orange County Health Department, the ABC Science Collaborative, for making what some thought was impossible possible for our students. You are all superheroes in my book, and I appreciate each and every one of you. But we're not done. We continue to plan for a safe return of more students with the help of the Orange County Health Department and the ABC Science Collaborative, as well as what we're learning from the 50 districts in North Carolina that have been in-person learning since August 17th, as well as other districts from across the country and the world that are providing in-person learning for students. What we've learned and now know that we didn't know back in August is that we can continue to safely make this transition to in-person learning if we continue to work as a team by strictly adhering to the 3 W's: masking, waiting at least 6 feet apart, washing and sanitizing our hands frequently, which Orange County residents seem to be doing a good job of. So based on the data that we are tracking through the health department. So bravo, and thank you all for doing your part. Projected here are the outcomes for tonight's meeting. We are here tonight to speak about the process and protocols that will be followed when addressing symptoms, confirmed cases, and clusters in the district, as well as how we'll communicate with stakeholders. Tonight, we also want to share plans for bringing back small groups of students, upcoming family information sessions, and the timeline for when families will inform the district of their learning option they are selecting for their children. So to kick off tonight's discussion, initially we were going to discuss them in this order: symptoms, positive cases, and clusters. We're going to start with clusters because Dr. Danny Benjamin, if you go to the next slide, please, who you all know quite well by now, co-chair of the ABC Science Collaborative, distinguished professor of pediatrics at Duke University School of Medicine, and much more, does have another appointment. So he is actually going to start with him first. And he's going to talk to us about a number of things, including clusters, and then we will flip to Dr. Dawson, who is going to continue the conversation around symptoms and what we will do when there's a positive case. And so with that, we'll stop here and turn things over to Dr. Benjamin.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Felder.
Sure.
Thank you for accommodating my schedule. I have several board meetings this week, and I wanted to give each board chance to both hear the presentation and to respond to it both critically and with questions. I think some of the data challenges some assumptions folks have held since March. And really credit to you and the board at Orange County for moving in the direction that you all are moving as it relates to following the science. And before I really get started, congratulations to Mr. Faulkner, whom I happen to know. He partnered with us one summer we have a program that brings underrepresented minority high school and college students, and also brings teachers to Duke every summer for a 10 or 12 week introduction to clinical research. And Mr. Faulkner was a part of that, just so happened to be a part of that, and was truly outstanding in that arena. So of any award that he wins at OCS, I'm certainly happy for him. The faculty and staff still speak fondly of Mr. Faulkner. Go ahead, next slide, please. So go ahead, next slide. As usual, we at the ABCs do not make any decisions, do not give any detailed advice, but rather present science and what the science supports. And please refer to DHHS and Health Department guidance. Go ahead, next slide, please. So as you all know, it's a data-driven approach to support decision-making around education and data to support the decisions that you're doing and targeted research opportunities. Go ahead, next slide, please. The educational outreach, I just want to give you a few updates. You can see our website there, abcsciencecollaborative.org. We've got a number of not only webinars that are an hour in length, we have also a collection of much shorter videos and other materials, teacher testimonials. We also have a password protected area for superintendents that has everything from detailed plans on how schools open. I want to thank in particular the folks at Central Elementary in Hillsborough who put together a detailed plan. That's a 10-page document on how they intended to open and to have traffic flow throughout the school. And then that's made available to all other schools, all other elementary schools in the collaborative as a prototypical example of how an elementary school can open responsibly and stay open responsibly. And that document will be made available to our partners in other states, including California, Michigan, and elsewhere. So thanks to Central Elementary for doing that. We continue on with meetings with principals. We were pleased to do that with the Orange County principals, as well as principals from other counties. And we have a program that we're starting to reach underserved families in the community that's going to be led by Drs. Kenesha Zimmerman, Ibi Kanakamboyo, and Gabriela Maradiaga. And the first districts around that are Durham Public Schools and OCS. And that is specifically designed to reach the African American and Latinx community. Go ahead, next slide, please. So we will be developing, or have under development and are soft launching this month, an app for screening that families can complete prior to school. This will facilitate several goals: rapid entry into school, weekly customized data-driven information to school leadership. The school leadership sees that data and bypasses and goes straight from families to schools, and detailed information and potential consequences of approaches, and support for implementation of local public health guidance. There's no research that gets done that identifies families within that. That's one of the questions we get. Families are consented prior to even approaching for future research. So go ahead, next slide, please. As far as pediatric research that goes and adult research that goes on, it's really to prevent severe disease and limit transmission. We should really think of these in two different buckets. Bucket number one is going to be district-wide analyses of data that are in some districts publicly available, other districts they are not. Students cannot be identified, and an example of one of those will be provided today. That's bucket one. So you'll see an example of that today. Students and families can't be identified, and that'll be self-explanatory. In bucket two, downstream, there may be opportunities for families to participate in either prevention of COVID research, for example, testing strategies, or life-saving opportunities, and families are consented for that. That's a rigorous consent procedure, and any of those that are even presented to families, families have the option to opt out of even being talked to about that if that's something that they have no interest in ever participating in. Go ahead, next slide, please. So this is a example of research in bucket one. So what we mean when we say that students will not be identified is that districts will send to us information by school, and those schools are numbered or lettered or coded. And you can see for how many infections are at a particular school in a particular week across time. And for many of the districts, this information is actually publicly available, but it's not easily retrievable. Go ahead, next slide, please. So this first research project that I wanted to give you all an interim update on is the secondary transmission. So as a reminder, there's going to be COVID-19 this winter in the schools. If students and staff, if schools are open, and there'll be COVID-19 if schools are closed, and both students and staff. And the key question is, are we going to have more COVID-19 as a result of in-person instruction? And there's fundamentally two ways to measure that. One of that is by measuring clusters, which was touched on earlier. I'll get back to that. And the other is secondary transmission. So clusters are 5 or more epidemiologically linked cases. Now there's some imperfection to using that as a measure, which we'll get into when I get on to some of the data. These are reported to the state. Secondary transmission right now is not reported to the state necessarily. And that's defined as transmission within the school from student to student. So if I'm a third grade student and I go to school at Central Elementary, for example, and I infect my classmate next to me, that is, I come in with primary infection. I'm coming in from the community with COVID-19. I infect my classmate. That is, when I do that, that is secondary transmission. That is transmission within the school environment. And that really is what schools should be targeting to prevent. If you get 4 or 5 of those together, that becomes then a cluster. And this secondary transmission can be student to staff, staff to staff, staff to student, or student to student. And really the key question is, as a result of schools being open, do we have more COVID-19 cases, the same number of COVID-19 cases, or less COVID-19 cases? Next slide, please. So just as a reminder, we presented the Utah data to you guys before, but if you do not mask, there were these 3 facilities out in Utah where masking was optional for one of the facilities. Masking for children was not enforced. And these facilities had a considerable amount of secondary transmission and had to close rapidly. And so if you don't mask, things are going to go sideways in a hurry. Go ahead, next slide, please. On the other hand, even in childcare, cases in the community will mean cases in schools and in childcare, but this does not equal necessarily disease spread. This was in Rhode Island, 66 programs with about 20,000 people, children and adults. There was no confirmed secondary transmission. There were 4 programs that had possible secondary transmission, and each of these instances was related to a lack of adhering to the protocols that they had in place around how people moved around and masking. So you can see 66 programs. Of those, 29 programs had infections. Of those, 9 had multiple infections, and of those, 4 had possible secondary transmission. So success even in young child care is possible. Go ahead, next slide, please. This is data again from last summer in Rhode Island. Now this is, if you'll hit go, I think you'll see China, and then go ahead, France, and then probably Australia. So, and that goes, you can say there. So in a series of reports out of various countries, secondary transmission was very low in parts of Europe, Australia, and China. One of the critiques of this as it relates to the American system is that quite a bit of the time, the community transmission at that time was very low. So here in North Carolina, community transmission is not low. Go ahead, next slide, please. So in but this was initially, this data from outside the US was reassuring that maybe schools were not going to be a source of infection. You're good. So the group up at Brown University produced data that, in their conclusion, children and schools were not spreading COVID-19. And this related to 200,000 children from 47 states. The primary critique of these data was that although they had cases of COVID-19, this research team actually did not have a good handle on the denominator. Remember, my numerator is my number of cases, and my denominator is all people who could possibly have infection. And they made assumptions around their denominator rather than having a robust denominator. Nonetheless, this was reassuring in the sense that it came from multiple different states in the United States when the pandemic was really getting back up to speed after many of these were after Labor Day. Many of these weeks of observation were after Labor Day, when the pandemic was up to speed in the US again. So we went into that. Go ahead, next slide, please. We now approach North Carolina. So this is data from the first quarter of North Carolina. And as one of the board members mentioned, there were 54 clusters that have been reported in North Carolina schools. Remember, however, that most of those clusters are actually in the private school setting. And in fact, it's a real testament to our public schools and to the leadership of the superintendents throughout the state that despite having much fewer students, the private schools have much more in the way of clusters on a population adjusted basis. So most of the clusters are actually in the private school setting, a few in the charter school settings. In traditional North Carolina public schools, in the first quarter of instruction, so there were a couple of the clusters that are on the DHH website where actually when schools were not in session, students were not there. And a couple of those have been since the end of the first quarter of instruction. They're actually now reporting on second quarter. So if we look at the 9 weeks of the first quarter of instruction, that represents 15 clusters and 119 cases. Now, this is from a student population of 500,000 students over 9 weeks of instruction. Most districts that were open did not report a single cluster. You can see here over on the right, Orange County Schools would be right on the cusp between a small district and a medium-sized district. We would classify Orange as a medium-sized district. You can see the number of cases there for medium-sized districts. Let's see here, 24, 36, 56 children in districts across the state that are the size of Orange County over 9 weeks. Again, this is about 1.5 clusters per week, over 500,000 children, plus all the school staff. So, and you'll recall that these are only positive tests. So about 40% of these are going to be asymptomatic. Most of the rest, the vast majority of the rest, are going to be not hospitalized. So go ahead, next slide, please. So the way we got the drawback to clusters, only tracking clusters, is that clusters can have a slight bias upward and a slight bias downward. What do I mean by that? Well, one of the clusters that's reported on the website is from a county where a child was last in school on October 23rd. On October 31st, that high school student developed symptoms and got tested for COVID-19, was positive. So clearly did not develop infection in school, and actually was later documented by public health not to have developed the infection in school. That child then went to a wedding, and a number of other children in that county then were infected at that wedding. All of them happened to go to the same school, however, so it was a cluster that was attributed to that school. So sometimes you can have clusters that have nothing to do with school. The other problem with relying only on clusters is that you can have secondary transmission and only have 1 or 2 or 3 cases of secondary transmission. It doesn't achieve the level of a cluster. So a cluster may not capture, will not capture actually all the infections that are going on. So for the school districts that are in North Carolina that have been open in the hybrid model for all of Q1, so in order to contribute data, they had to have been open for the full 9 weeks in hybrid instruction. They have to have been in the ABC Science Collaborative, and they have to have signed an MOU and data use agreement. And what they do is they track COVID-19 by school by week. So I don't necessarily, I don't even know what high school A is. I just know that there's a high school where superintendent is calling that high school A. At that particular high school, there was 1 primary infection, but that child did not infect anyone else. In the 5th of October, there were 4 infections at high school A, but health department evaluation concluded that those infections were not related to each other, and those children or adults did not infect anyone else at that particular high school. Note that we chose the full 9 weeks of instruction because of a paper in the Lancet that indicates that you really are going to need several weeks of being open and in instruction before you know if you're going to have problems with COVID-19. So we wanted to give schools the full opportunity to have problems, if any existed. And we now have enough data that have come in from enough districts to do a top-line interim analysis, and we're going to present those data here tonight for the first time publicly. Although in an op-ed from Wall Street Journal, colleagues had heard that we were going to be presenting this and quoted that in an op-ed. This is the first time folks will be seeing the data. Go ahead, next slide, please. So this represents nearly 60,000 children and adults from across North Carolina. And in those school districts, there were 197 primary infections. So children came into the schools, they had positive COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2 test. You're seeing that right now in Wake County. Children are coming into Wake County with a positive test. So are adults. But of those 97, there were only 8 secondary transmission infections. So this is 9 weeks of instruction across 60,000 people. 8 secondary transmissions. That is less than 1 secondary transmission per week across 60,000 people, and 0 child to adult transmission. Now, as a reminder, transmission in the community, again, each North Carolinian is going to infect between 1 and 2 other people. Someone in a North Carolina school is going to be infecting less than 0.1 other people. Higher rates of COVID-19 in the community did not impact secondary transmission. So Iredell has contributed data. They have considerably higher cases per 100,000 population than Orange, as does Surrey County. Moore County has less, about the same as Orange County. If any of these counties are misspelled, I apologize. I put this slide together at about 3 o'clock in the morning on Sunday. And Jones County has a little bit less. So size, number of cases per 100,000 population does not impact secondary transmission. One of the concerns that has been expressed is, not everybody in school is tested, and that's certainly true because not everybody in the community is tested. So you're really comparing apples to apples here. Testing, each of these children and adults in the schools had contact tracing. Not everybody got tested, and that's also true, and is what happens in the community. There are a couple of districts that are tracking children who are all remote versus children who are in hybrid learning and tracking their infections as well. That's very uncommon. Those data are much less sparse. I don't think that they will withstand peer review because there's so few counties and so few observations. However, in those settings, there's actually more children who are infected in the remote learning environment than in the hybrid learning environment. Go ahead, next slide, please. So if you're opening without adherence to the 3 W's, failure is going to be likely. And I'm glad to see how robust Orange County is approaching this. This is one of the counties that I worry about the least. If K through 12 adheres to the 3 W's, schools can reopen safely with no additional risk as it relates to COVID-19. This is now supported by North Carolina data. But this really only applies to schools with a high compliance of COVID-19 prevention strategies. They have a culture of safety, which I fully anticipate, based on our interactions with Orange County, will likely happen under Dr. Felder's leadership and that of the principals with whom I have spoken. Now there is, the data also suggests that it's possible that keeping schools closed may be worse for COVID-19 prevention than safe reopening. And that is you really want to think of these decisions in terms of public health versus individual decisions. So there are families that in remote learning essentially keep themselves and their children in a bubble. They never go outside the home. They never go out to eat. All the food is delivered in. Their children don't ever play with other children. But the experience now, 8 or 9 months into the pandemic, is that's not happening for all North Carolinians, as evidenced by the couple of thousand infections that we're seeing every day. And schools, especially traditional public schools, are expert at keeping children and adults safe. They do that everywhere from the broad oversight that they get from school boards, such as you all, from professionals who do this full-time for a living with leadership, such as district staff, from folks who are expert at implementing those plans, such as principals. And they do that for everything from school shooting to earthquakes to fire to vaccine to violence to child maltreatment to nutrition. The list goes on and on and on. And so in some sense, it's not a surprise that they would also be expert in taking principles as it relates to a pandemic and be more successful than, for example, a restaurant owner or the manager at a large grocery store or the owner of a bar, etc. So really, you've got hours that are being spent in school with the 3 Ws enforced. The kids are in a safer environment, the adults are in a safer environment versus all of their time in the community where the 3 Ws are often not enforced. Go ahead, next slide, please. So in the hybrid model, following the 3 Ws, secondary transmission in North Carolina has been extremely low. The schools following the 3 Ws are not contributing to community spread. Time spent in school is right now, the data look like it's safer for children and adults in the general community. The amount of COVID-19 in the community has not predicted success or failure, and opening schools or staying open. And I want to make a large note here that we don't have data to support or challenge the safety of going to Plan A. It simply is too early for us to comment on that. Go ahead, next slide, please. So based on that, we've put together some metrics for continuing in-person instruction or a move to a remote instruction. So this is based on what's achievable as it relates to clusters and secondary transmission. And it uses North Carolina data to inform school and district level decisions. It provides metrics that are school specific, metrics that are not school specific, such as % positive cases or cases per 100,000 population, are not supported by North Carolina data. And COVID-19 safety is much like any public health problem, right? Like the targets for those problems are within the schools. So we don't look at the measles vaccine uptake in meat packing plants to determine if our vaccination policies in schools are effective. We look at our vaccination rates in our children in public schools. Likewise, if we're looking at COVID-19 success, we should be looking at data from within school. And the proposed metrics are directly impacted by the district policies that you all are considering and the behaviors of school employees and students in school. And the one thing we are starting to see at a few of the schools is some pandemic fatigue, especially as they enter the second 9 weeks of instruction, and I can come back to that later. So the data-driven metrics. So really, if you have, if you're having multiple clusters within a 2 or 3 week period within a school, this should raise a red flag. Most of the clusters that are reported are single clusters at a school. Again, if you've got more than 3 clusters per 10,000 students in a school district, this is something that should really raise a red flag, really should be evaluated. You can be in a situation where, I'm not going to give the name of the county, but you can be in a situation where children get together to attend a wedding or a party or a funeral. And a couple of those clusters have been reported, and that's beyond the control or the purview of the school safety environment. But if you're having multiple clusters in Orange County, you really, in a school district the size of Orange County, you really want to look at that. If you have substantial secondary transmission in either a school or a school district, this is something where you really want to look at what's happening within the school or the school district for a thorough review and lessons learned. And again, these are based on the data that we've collected thus far from North Carolina. Go ahead, next slide, please. Maybe, these are the first of the districts to have MOUs in place. I'll just end the presentation right there. And thanks to you all at Orange County Schools, one of the very first early adopters, and to the 50 some odd districts in North Carolina that are participating in the collaborative. Thanks.
Dr. Benjamin, we always appreciate your expertise. Are there any questions for Dr. Benjamin? Ms. Smiley?
Sorry, I think I just have one. Dr. Benjamin, I think it's something that you explained earlier, but it would be helpful for me to understand a little bit more. And thank you for this very informative presentation. So one question I've had is sort of, how can we know that there aren't more secondary infections than we are seeing in schools, given how many children are asymptomatic? Like, what I'm sort of trying to play out is, are we missing cases in the data where, you know, a student passes it to another student, the student is asymptomatic, but then brings it home to grandma, that kind of thing, you know, like, just, can you just talk to me more about that piece, the contact tracing and the testing and how that plays in here?
Sure thing. I'll talk to you for just a brief bit, but I would really encourage you to talk to the health department folks, because that's really their swim lane. They're expert at it. They're doing a good job of it within this county, and I would defer to them. I'll talk to you about biases in the data. Okay. So whatever, unless we were to test every student and every teacher every day, we will have uncertainty. We will have considerable uncertainty unless we test everyone every week. Testing in the K through 12, by the way, as a tangent, is speculated that it may not be a good way to manage the pandemic, in contrast to managing the pandemic in a boarding school or a college. But even if we had the resources to test periodically, we would still have uncertainty if we were missing infections. So the number one question about whether or not you should do things from a public health perspective, like go out to eat in a restaurant and leave your mask off and sit in a restaurant for an hour. Well, there's a lot of contact tracing that goes on around that, and it turns out that's a risk factor. Going out to eat is a risk factor for disease. So if you want to avoid COVID-19, you probably don't want to do stuff like go out to eat and hang out within a restaurant or a bar. If you, in contrast, in the schools, when you do contact tracing, you're not seeing among either children or adults who've been contacted high rates of positive tests. In fact, you're seeing almost none. And you're not seeing high rates of infection of child who comes in positive or adult who comes in positive to other adults or to their family members. Now, is it possible that we're missing some? Sure, absolutely. In fact, I'm quite confident that in any area of North Carolina, we're missing some infections. The thing to consider as a school board is comparing the secondary transmission in schools to other environments where there are also thousands of adults, because there's a non-trivial number of adults in schools and a non-trivial number of children, for example, like a church. Schools are doing much, much better in those environments. Schools are doing better than other areas of the community. And just like we're missing many infections in the community, I suspect we're missing some in schools. And your health department folks can walk you through kind of the details of contact tracing of how they might follow that thread through.
Thanks very much.
Ms. Hauser?
I have a couple questions, and thank you so much. It's always a privilege. With a vaccine feeling imminent, is it conceivable that teachers could be on the list of initial recipients of vaccines? Because they always talk about medical professionals, but they never talk about teachers.
Yes, it's unclear what will happen with the new administration, but it's quite likely that the first wave of recipients will be healthcare providers. That's simply good pandemic management, because if you don't have anyone to staff the intensive care units or the hospital settings, it's going to be a problem. And you're starting to see some of the hospitals in the Midwest where they may start experiencing that. The teachers, I'm hopeful, will be prioritized given the personal life experiences of the First Lady, who First Lady-elect, excuse me, who was an English teacher. I'm hopeful that we will see teachers offered vaccination in 2021. That's somewhat speculative on my part, but I think that there'll be a push for that. And some of us have been walking through that information with folks at Food and Drug Administration and other folks in the federal government. That's to be untwined from will children get vaccinated, because that's a completely different risk-benefit equation. Pfizer has only just started to allow a few children down to age 12. There's going to be a whole host of other things that have to be done to really get safety data nailed down in adolescence. Then you've got a different stepwise equation that you need to do for under 12. They may need to do preclinical tox and reformulation, depending on the vaccine, which vaccine gets emergency use authorization. The Pfizer EUA is very, very impressive. It's exceeded, the top line results exceeded our expectations. We're hopeful about it. We should keep in mind that it's very, very early with respect to safety and efficacy. And those of us who are going to be taking the vaccine in the first quarter of 2021 will essentially be consenting to doing a human subjects experiment ourselves. It's just that instead of half of us receiving the vaccine and half of us receiving placebo, we're all going to be receiving vaccine and essentially be under study for adverse events. Because at 30,000 with a month or so of data, that's very, very early. Exciting, but early. I would expect we're not going to know really about children until young children until 2022 or 2023, because of the time sequence of events that have to occur between now and establishing the risk-benefit ratio of an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old to take the vaccine.
Okay.
Ms. Hauser.
Other question, that's really helpful. Other question is, you've talked about fatigue, I want to call it protocol fatigue, COVID fatigue. I also would add in the risk, startup risk when we're first getting things going. And are there any things that you might caution us on, where lunch is one, and one of the things that's been bothering some of us is doing alternating weeks, especially for young children. And do you, getting them used to a routine, is there an issue with alternating their weeks? So just curious if there are any things that you see as particularly risky in terms of getting compliance with protocol.
Sure. So let's talk about. First, I don't have data nor an opinion about 2 days a week versus every other week. Both models have been successful. It's more common to come in for 2 days and 2 days, but or 3 days, 2 days, then 2 days, 3 days. I mean, that's been more common than doing the week to week, but I don't have any data to support one method versus the other. The kids actually are not we're not seeing the challenges around compliance especially with young children, with children period in school and with young children. A lot of the compliance problem in COVID fatigue has had to do with masking compliance in longer term in adults. And there's several districts that are really struggling right now with staffing because of the adults not adhering to either masking or distancing requirements. The children tend to actually do quite well with it. Then as far as the higher risk, certainly, and this has been mentioned earlier in the day, earlier in this meeting, around lunch and breakfast being higher risk times. Those are higher risk times. And, if I had extra money to spend, it would be in the adapted curriculum. Then number 2 would be probably around compliance, and then number 3 would probably be around eating. So the tents, for example, the tent idea, other districts have talked about having outdoor facilities for eating, or kind of a pop-off valve, if you will, or if you're going to take compliance lessons learned from hospital infection control. What it's taken for us is that in the 1990s, when I was in training, the compliance actually for washing hands by physicians, nurses, respiratory therapists, phlebotomists in hospitals was only 50%, 50. 50%. Half the time you met somebody in the hospital, they had not washed their hands before they touched you. This came to a head at a professional conference, medical conference, where medical students were put into the public bathrooms with a clipboard and recorded who washed their hands. And only 70% of people at an infectious disease medical conference washed their hands after using the public restroom. So as a community, we finally said, okay, we need to address this. And we did that by putting in anonymous hotlines that were staffed so that staff could report on hand washing concerns. We put public health nurses and infection prevention control nurses and prevention control staff throughout the hospitals with clipboards who actually recorded whether or not physicians, nurses, phlebotomists, respiratory therapists were washing their hands before they came in with patients. And hand washing compliance, the hospital personnel, by the way, were not super thrilled with this at first, but hand washing compliance got into the 90s, and thankfully hand washing has gone way up. Nosocomial hospital-acquired infections have really dropped off, and compliance is used as a way for adherence to the protocols. And it's been very effective over and over and over again in healthcare systems. If you want to drop the risk of infection, of people infecting each other, this is where you spend your money after your first couple of weeks of doing this. Get your protocols in place and use your resources there, because there will be COVID fatigue in 2021 and 2022. If you'll do those items, you can have staff do a walkthrough, stick their head into the classroom and just count quickly who actually has mask over nose, mouth, chin. You don't do it for punishment. You do it for probability of how many people that you see in that classroom that are compliant. You summarize those data for the principal, and then you say, your mask compliance rate is 80%, or your mask compliance rate is 90%. This is the target that we have for you. This is where your school is achieving. You don't use it to punish your people. You use it so that your principals and that your staff and your community can work together to drive to a metric. So if you've got excess resources financially, those are well-traveled paths to prevent infection spread. That's kind of the pandemic. There are districts that are starting to see now such problems with staffing. They're not seeing infections yet, they're seeing staffing problems. And I can tell you, after staffing problems, the next problem you're going to have is going to be infection problem. That's really the early warning sign there. And they're starting to move toward working with us on those compliance intervention plans.
Dr. Benjamin, I want to thank you so much for being here with us tonight. We are so grateful to you, as always.
Great, thank you.
Dr. Felder, I will turn it back over to staff to complete the rest of the items in this number.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Mackenzie. Thank you, Dr. Benjamin, as always, for your wisdom and expertise. And good evening, Chair Mackenzie, Vice Chair Stevens, board members, and Superintendent Felder. I think one of the key things, well, there were so many key elements that Dr. Benjamin shared with us this evening, but one thing for sure is the level of uncertainty. And so, you know, understanding that there will be a level of uncertainty, what will be very important is that we as a school district have protocols in place should we have a positive case and to be ready for any situation. And so tonight what we would like to do is share with you what our protocols we have in place should we have a case of a positive screening or diagnosis of COVID-19. And so tonight we're going to share with you how we do the screening, what we do when we have confirmed cases, and just kind of touch again on what Dr. Benjamin spoke about on clusters. And then we will actually be bringing back, and then of course we'll talk about how we will communicate with stakeholders. So if we can go to the next slide. One thing that is very, very important, because again, there is a way we can prevent secondary transmission. There is a way that we can prevent bringing it into our schools. And so what we ask students and families to do, and this is what staff and families must do to complete every day, to complete a daily health screening and temperature check before you leave your school for work, and before you leave your home for school or work, because it starts right from there. So before you leave home for school and or work, we're asking every single member to ask yourselves these 3 questions as part of the screening process. We're asking that you ask yourselves, and families to ask yourselves of your children, has your student had close contact in the last 14 days with someone diagnosed with COVID-19? A close contact, which means they were within 6 feet of someone for at least 15 minutes or more. Or has any health department or healthcare provider been in contact with you and advised you or your child to quarantine? Second question, is your child or staff member, when you're asking yourself this, experiencing any symptoms of COVID-19, such as a fever, chills, shortness of breath, or difficulty breathing, a new cough, new loss of taste or smell? And the third question, has your student or your staff member, have you been diagnosed with COVID-19 since you were last at school or work? So when you're asking these 3 questions, if you answer yes to any of the following 3 questions, then that means you have screened positive. So if we go to the next slide, this kind of gives us a visual. If you answered no to all 3 questions, that means you have no flags, you're clear to proceed to school and or work. But if you answered yes to any one of the 3 questions, then what we're asking you to do is please stay home. If you can't go to school or work because you've answered yes, then we ask you to call your principal or your supervisor immediately, and then of course call your doctor as a follow-up measure. If we go to the next slide, we will conduct another screening when you get to school or work. And at the time of your arrival, we will ask you those 3 questions again, and we will take your temperature. Again, if your answers are no and your temperature is for students 100 or lower, for staff 100.4 or lower, then that means you have no flags, you're clear to go to class or go to work. Even once you've done that throughout the day, should you have any cause to think that you're getting any symptoms, we then will again check you for symptoms. The nurse will check you for symptoms. And if you again have a yes, you have any of those symptoms, then that means that you will be reevaluated and then determined at that time if you are safe to return back to class or work, or if you need to go home. Well, if you arrive to school and or work and we're screening you, you have a temperature or you're answering yes to any of those questions, then we will need to reevaluate you. So students will be sent to see the nurse, where the nurse will assess if before going into the nurse's room or into the care center, so that we're not contaminating either of those spaces, that the nurse will assess if the child has symptoms or not. And then based upon that assessment, they will either go to the nurse's office, because you know what, it might just be a simple tummy ache that they have, or maybe they're coming down with a cold, but the nurse will assess that. Then they would go to the nurse's office. If the nurse is assessing that, you know what, these are more of COVID symptoms, and to err on safety, we're going to send the student to the care center. At that time, family will be notified, a parent or a guardian will be called to ask to come and pick up the child, to take them home, to follow up with their doctor. The staff member will be isolated in a designated space for them to reassess and to determine if they need to go home or if they're okay to stay at work. So this is kind of like the flow of what will go on after you've done your screening at home, you come to school or work, that there's another layer of screening. So what's important then, if we go to the next slide, is how will we communicate on the student side? Should there be a confirmed case or presumptive case of COVID-19? Families, if at home, right? We want to make sure that you notify your school's principal immediately, because then the administrator will contact the school nurse, and the school nurse will then be sure to reach out to the Orange County Health Department, our own Director of Environmental Health and Safety, who will then notify our custodial staff to ensure that any impacted areas will be thoroughly cleaned. And then, of course, our director will immediately notify the superintendent as well, and the transportation department, because if the child is on a bus or using any of our transportation services, that area will need to be cleaned as well. And of course, the superintendent will always follow up with the board with any pertinent information. So this is kind of the communication flow for students. Very similar if we go to the next slide for staff. And so we have two categories for staff. We have staff who work at schools and staff who are at other central office buildings. And so staff, you will want to contact your principal, and your principal will then notify your nurse. Then the nurse will notify Human Resources, our Director of Environmental Health and Safety, and our Orange County Health Department. And then our director, of course, the remainder of their communication flow is similar as to that of the students. And then if you are not in a school, but at a central office level building, you notify your supervisor, who will then notify your lead nurse. And then the lead nurse will continue on with the communication flow, similarly as the school nurse will. And so these are just two guidelines of how the communication flow will happen. This will happen in a matter of minutes. It does happen quickly, it happens. And so families, it's really important, and staff members, even if you're finding out during the weekend, Saturday, Sunday morning, Sunday night, whatever the time is, it's very important that you call and let us know immediately. Please do not wait until the next school day, because that's time, valuable time that we could have, started the follow-up as to the contact tracing or the cleaning and everything that needs to happen. It would be important that it happens immediately, that we know, because if we wait, then that's time, valuable time that we will have lost. And so if we go to the next slide, should there be a confirmed or presumptive case, and especially if we're on campus, again, shared as previously in the slide there, that we will isolate and we will designate specific areas that will be supervised. And we have care centers in all of our schools. We have rooms identified in our various administration buildings for our staff. And then immediately, of course, families will be notified should there be a case on campus. And then there will always be follow-up of any confirmed case, because it will be very important that we work with the Orange County Department of Health and the recommendations that they provide. We will be in close contact with our school nurse, of course, and any space or school closures that occur will only happen with the collaboration and guidance of what we find out from our Orange County Health Department and potential outside partners such as the ABC Science Collaborative. Because of the science and the research that they know, we will refer to the facts and the research before making decisions. And of course, all areas will be cleaned. And so the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services has very specific guidance should there be a confirmed or presumptive case, and we will be adhering to that very closely in partnership with our own Orange County Health Department. So if a screening does result in a person saying they have been diagnosed but have no symptoms, we will close off areas used by the person, and we will not use that area until after cleaning and disinfecting. We will always, again, consult with our Orange County Health Department, and if a confirmed case has been reported to Orange County Schools, but the person is not currently on campus, again, we will consult with Orange County Health Department, and then, of course, the closure of the room or entire building. Any of those decisions will be made case by case, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And so, Dr. Benjamin, if we go to the next slide, gave us some in-depth information about what is a cluster, what is secondary transmission. So I don't want to spend too much time on this because he kind of went over that. But if we go to the next slide, should we have a cluster that's been determined within our school or the district, there are three specific steps, three-step process for addressing this cluster. Step one, the district leadership works to determine if safety protocols were adhered to, such as did we follow the 3 W's at the time of the cluster. We seek to understand the circumstantial details. For example, what grade level was impacted? Was the class, what was the classroom setting? Was participation in extracurricular activities a factor? These are just some of the questions that we'll be asking to better understand how did this cluster come about. And then the step two, we will then, of course, identify the lessons learned with the health department. And then step three, we will review and revisit any policies that we might need to amend to make sure that we do not continue to get clusters within our school and or district. So the big question, of course, then is how do we determine and when do we determine to close a school or a building? So I just want to state here that it is very, very important that we understand that every situation must be addressed case by case. Each case is very individual and unique to its own circumstances. So we can't say, you know what, we have a situation, so this is what we're going to do, and this is going to be the answer every single time. There is no one answer. And so it's very important that we understand that. So a school and or district closure must be done in close collaboration with the Orange County Health Department. Closure will depend on the extent and severity of illness, whether part of a school, a whole school, or more than one school is closed will be determined by the superintendent's district team in collaboration with the Orange County Health Department. And the OCS team consists of the superintendent, the deputy superintendent, the lead nurses, public information officer, the chief operating officer, the director of exceptional children, and the director of environmental health and safety. The superintendent, of course, will always make the recommendation to the board. There are a number of factors that are taken into consideration. And again, each case is addressed case by case and must be dealt with in a timely manner. This has implications for the current role of our metrics monitoring task force.
If I could just insert here, thank you, Dr. Dawson, for bringing this matter up. So, Board, as you know, currently some of our district's EC separate setting and pre-K students are already in Plan B. Decisions regarding symptoms and cases and clusters, as Dr. Dawson said, will need to be made on an in-the-moment, case-by-case, scenario-by-scenario basis. We will not have time to convene the metrics monitoring task force, nor will we be able to share and discuss with them information that's confidential in order to protect the identity of students and staff. So as a result, I am recommending that we pause the metrics monitoring task force while we're in Plan B. The Orange County Health Department, who supported the creation of this task force, is in support of that recommendation. Okay.
Okay, and so, I'm just going to go on to the next slide here, because it's important that there are a number of factors that we consider when we're shifting or when we're considering to shift from Plan B, between Plan B and Plan C, according to the analysis of the different cases, should there be. So with the Orange County Health Department, the district will consider other factors when deciding if we're shifting from Plan B to Plan C. And some of these factors include the amount of COVID-19 cases in the district, the number of staff members available to ensure safety for students and staff, the capacity of the contact tracing by the health department, the ability for our district to implement key mitigation strategies such as consistent and correct use of masks, the physical social distancing, our hand washing, right, and the respiratory etiquette, cleaning and disinfection of surfaces and shared times, contact tracing in collaboration with the health department, especially around any large events. And then, of course, quarantining of students or staff members who present symptoms and those who have been exposed to those who have presented symptoms consistent with the state and federal guidance. And as the pandemic continues to evolve, the district may consider other factors. So that kind of summarizes for us how we need to screen before leaving home. And, you know, the next layer of screening once we get to school. And then what's the communication flow for students and staff? Should there be a confirmed case or presumptive case? And then what are all the different things that we need to take into consideration in collaboration with the Orange County Health Department to determine how we need to shift between Plan B and Plan C. So if there aren't any questions, because I know we're really excited for the next part because we do have schools that are here to share some information. So
Mr. Atherton and then Ms. Smiley, and I'll just ask us to move through as quickly as we can.
Sure. Just a few questions. So when you say the home screening, the parents are going to do that themselves, and then the students will do that with staff when they get on site?
Correct.
Is that the thought? Okay. Yes. How does that work for a school bus? Will there be screening at the school bus and then at the school? Or, you know, I'm just trying to figure out, you know, if we don't screen before they get on the bus, they're going to be on the bus 30 minutes, you know, whichever. Yeah. So is there thoughts on how that screening will occur for a bus?
So we are asking families to do, of course, that health screening that we discussed, we are asking families to do every day. And the families will fill out a one-time attestation form for transportation department saying that before I put my child on a bus, that I am saying that I will make sure that I screen my child before putting on the bus every time. So parents are being asked to sign off on that. And then as the child is getting on the bus, they will actually have a touchless temperature screening that will be done before they get on the bus. And so this is why it's really important. And I keep saying the word important, and it's not that I don't have another vocabulary word for it, but just the importance, right, of that everyone must be responsible for doing our part. And one of the reasons why we're asking that there be a parent or guardian with the students at the bus stop is, one, to help monitor the students at the bus stop to make sure that the students are maintaining social distancing and keeping on their masks, but also when getting on the bus, should a student read a because they might have been fine before they left the house, but while they were waiting at the bus stop and if they're getting their temperature checked as they get on the bus, and then we see that, wait a minute, now the child has a temperature, then we're going to ask that adult to take that child back home. And this is why we're asking that parents and guardians be at the bus stop with their children. And so that's another layer. And then, of course, when they get to the school and they're getting off the bus, yes, our school staff will be there to again screen and do the temperature check and to make sure they're safe. So and I think this is when Dr. Benjamin, speaks of the data from other schools that have been in session and why there is such minimal infections at the schools is because the schools, we are working diligently to ensure that we're following all these precautionary measures, and adhering to all these steps that we know will help prevent. And so I think that's why this is really important that everyone does their part.
Thank you. The other question I had was, are we doing, we would call them tabletop exercises at my work, but it's essentially where you saw the flows. You would pick a person and say, okay, this person today at Stanford has COVID. Okay, go, right? And okay, did everybody get the same name? Did everybody identify the same person? Okay, we did this in 3 schools. Did we get those back, correctly? So have y'all done that, or y'all gonna do that, or?
We haven't done that yet, but we're planning our dry runs of the different scenarios.
Okay.
We're just right now, schools are in the process of making sure that they have all of their checklists and everything done and ready. And then once we do, we definitely will be doing those dry runs.
Okay, yeah, the flow looks great. It's just now making sure it's as expected. All right, thank you.
My only question about the flow was I didn't see a step in there of notifying the schools of other household members and like gathering up other household members. And I know the state guidance, I mean, their symptom screen right now is, does your child have any of these symptoms? And if yes, that other household members, siblings, parents, whoever, should also quarantine for 14 days. And so it seems like if the person then is displaying the symptoms at school, that we would have a step to gather the rest of the family who should also quarantine. Is that part of our process?
So one thing that we didn't go into the details with in this presentation, Ms. Smiley, is the steps that the Orange County Health Department takes, because once they're contacted, they will do that part of it and doing the follow-up and connecting all of the other people, and that's the follow-up that they do. So we didn't include those details in there. So that's why they're one of the first people that we call, because they then do further follow-up and contact tracing.
But I think it isn't contact tracing. It's just, the step, if you're screening at home, if one of your children has symptoms, you're supposed to keep all of your children home. And so yes, if the child has symptoms at school, I would think we would then, if we're sending them home, that we would send all household members home. Is that the plan for us?
Can I, this is Diane Rucker, one of the co-lead nurses. Yes, once your nurse is making an assessment, she will be looking to see whether or not there are siblings, or asking if there's, parents in the system and whatnot. And we will be talking amongst our nurses on other campuses, other schools, so that all of that can get coordinated.
Great, thank you so much.
And hi, this is Penny Ross. I'm one of the other school nurses. For example, if a car rolls up with like 5 kids in it from the same family and one screens positive or has a fever, then all of those students, yes, will need to go home.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rocker and Ms. Rosser. It's so helpful to have nurses on the line answering our questions. And thank you, Dr. Dawson. Board, if you have additional questions, let's take them to email so that we can move forward with our plans for bringing back student groups.
Okay, well, thank you, Mrs. McKenzie. And so while our schools continue to explore ways that they may be able to bring back small groups of students, 4 of our schools have been successful with doing so. I'm excited that they will have an opportunity to share their plans with you tonight. I'm also excited to inform you that you'll also hear from Mrs. Connie Crimmins, the director for the exceptional director of exceptional children about the next phase of small groups of students her office is planning to bring back, working collaboratively with schools. And so here tonight to share with us their plans for returning small groups to school are Principal Matt Hunt and Mr. Jeffrey Bauman from Orange High School, Principal Dr. Carlos Ramirez, and Mr. Aaron Mitchell and Miss Erin Bradley from Cedar Ridge High School. Also joining us tonight are Principal Mr. Tony Witter and Mr. Patrick Mitchell from Cameron Park Elementary, and last but certainly not least, Principal Mrs. Amber Wilson and Miss Cheryl Mitchell. Several Mitchells tonight from New Hope Elementary School. So without further ado, I am going to turn it over to them. And what you see on the slide actually is the three buckets that the bringing small groups of students back to school have fallen into. The first one is extracurricular athletics. Then there are labs, and last but not least, academic support. So without further ado, first up will be Orange High.
All right, thank you, Dr. Felder. It's nice to see everybody on the board tonight, and thank you for having Orange High represented. And I'll be very brief. I have a special guest, a teacher leader, Mr. Jeffrey Bowman, who's going to share all the valuable information, but wanted to thank our cross-country team, our volleyball team, especially our EC team, and all the teachers who have initiated clubs and small groups being on campus already, and then in the coming weeks, leading the way. And because of their success in adhering to all the safety protocols, everything has gone extremely smooth, and they have led the way, I think, instilled some confidence in other groups being on campus. So recently, or a few weeks ago, Mr. Bowman had suggested a lab, and we had about a dozen students on campus last week, and from his chemistry class. And he and his students did a phenomenal job, and I'm going to kick it to him so he can talk about the purpose of the lab and how it went from his point of view.
All right, thank you.
We can't hear you, Mr. Bowman. So you don't look muted. Sometimes it's something with connecting your computer's audio.
You see that?
Best thing ever.
Right there. Is everything good now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you guys this evening. I want to share my experience of bringing back that group of students on Tuesday, November 3rd to work in a science lab. This class was AP Chemistry, and 10 of my 13 students were able to come in that day. Just to note, of the 3 students who did not come in, 1 had to go to work, 1 volunteered in the election site, and the other in an orthodontist appointment. One of the attendees required transportation, and our school was nice enough to send a bus to pick him up. From a COVID-19 perspective, the students were asked to stay home if they experienced any COVID-19 symptoms, and all had their temperatures checked upon entry. The students and myself wore face masks in addition to our safety goggles. Each student worked alone at lab stations that were spaced out around the room. The experiment they ran was called molar volume of a gas lab. Students were able to measure out strips of magnesium and add them to hydrochloric acid. They then used UDometers, which allowed them to measure the amount of gas collected from the chemical reaction. After doing so much work on Zoom, it was refreshing to see the students interact and ask each other questions face to face. Upon finishing, I was able to assist each student with getting started on their post-lab calculations, and we worked together in class for a total of 2 hours. Each student who did not make it in to work on the lab was paired up with one who was, so they still got the data collected that day. Photos of key steps in the experiment were also taken and shared with students. Next time, I would consider having lab partners live stream the lab to students who could not make it in, but were able to still work from home. Bringing these students back into the right circumstances was very, very beneficial to their learning and mental health, and I was very excited to have them come in and already planning on another lab for them next week, as well as future labs for my forensic science classes, which are larger in size, but I feel they should also have access to the same opportunity that these students did as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bremer. Mr. Atherton, do you have a question?
No, what I wanted to do is tell Jeffrey and Mr. Hunt, thank you so much for driving this, making sure everybody can participate. That's been a large concern, is making sure that everybody would be included, that we wouldn't have equity issues, and just wanted to thank you for your insistence and pushing, and looking forward to hearing how the next one goes.
Thank you.
Yes, I certainly echo that, and also just absolutely love that your child saved the audio. Tell him we are very impressed.
And we may have a job for him. Okay, Cedar Ridge. Okay, so why don't we circle back to Cedar Ridge? We will go next to Cameron Park.
Well, good evening, everyone. This is Tony Woodard. Thanks for giving us an opportunity to talk about our Robotics Club. But before I kick it over to Mr. Mitchell, I do want to just take note that the student that helped Mr. Bowman is a Cameron Park student. Yes, he's an amazing kid. So Mr. Mitchell's here to talk to everyone about our Robotics Club and discuss the purpose for that group meeting in person.
I don't actually see Mr. Mitchell in the participant list.
Mr. Mitchell is my spouse, and I'm supposed to speak for New Hope Elementary. I can allow him to use my link if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Never mind, I think he has.
There we go.
Is anybody else hearing anything?
He's still muted, it shows.
Hey, I think I fixed it. Is it fixed?
We can hear you now.
All right. Woo-hoo. Thanks. My name is Patrick Mitchell. I'm the music teacher at Cameron Park Elementary and the head robotics coach for our team, Robo Tigers. Our team is helped by one of our school parents, Josh Morelli, and our teacher assistant at our school, Mr. Wayne Leonard. And I'm also happy to be able to have a student from our OCS robotics team, the Hedgehogs, Miss Sally Salamanca Pelez. Could we go to the next slide, please? And the next one after that, because I'm just going to go a little bit quicker for us tonight. Yes, virtual learning. Thank you. This summer, First Lego announced that competitions would resume, but in a virtual environment. So when we started school in August, I contacted all of the students that were involved with our club, which was roughly about 30 students. And out of those 30 students, only 16 students were present at our first meeting. So I started contacting parents, and I discovered that screen time and school workload were the primary reasons that children were not interested anymore. They were really missing the hands-on part, the closeness that they would feel within the club. Next slide, please. we meet twice a week for 30 to 60 minutes, and we used our time for team building and brainstorming crazy things and working on specifically a presentation for our competition. And as the school year progressed, more students stopped coming, and now we're down to 6 students. The students in the group that were interested in building robots, I went over to their house and did a lawn visit and gave them a robotics kit that they would be able to use. And I was able to, half of our club was interested in designing robots. So they had to start thinking of ways to be able to collaborate virtually, and things were just getting harder and harder to keep the club going. The closeness that you see happening, oh, next slide, please. The closeness that you see in these pictures just wasn't happening. Students weren't there and brainstorming with each other and being able to actually have these hands-on moments. And instead, trying to design virtually and apart, it just wasn't very successful at all. But then we were given the okay to start meeting as a club. And it was amazing how the students right away, they started opening up. They're 6 feet away from each other. They're having temperature checks. They've got masks on, but they're still cheering for these little moments of getting a robot to go just a foot down a board and being able to accomplish a mission. So it's right away, there's these videos are being shared with the rest of the team that's not there, and everything is starting to come together, which is perfect because we're going to have a practice competition next week, and we're going to have our first on-campus meeting tomorrow night at Cameron Park, where we're going to have to try to make a video of what we have so far in regards to the completion of our robot and the competition itself, and have some people give us feedback on that. So I'm really looking into that or looking forward to that, sorry. It's really proving to be quite exciting. So I'm really happy that we have a chance to be able to do that. Part of what we do is about innovation to our approach and everything, and we're taking everything that we need to understand about COVID and what we have to do to keep ourselves safe. And it's almost as if the students are having that as part of their project. So it's really kind of interesting to see how they react, and they're trying to do things but maintaining 6 feet apart, and it's just a lot of fun. But more importantly, the excitement on their faces, it's worth everything. It's worth everything. So, you know, we can do this, and being able to meet in person is going to make sure this robotics program survives. So I just want to thank you guys for the time to explain our team and be able to tell you that this has really been a great thing, and being virtually was hurting our participation, but now we have nothing but success. So thank you very much.
Mr. Mitchell and Mr. Witter, thank you so much for showing this opportunity to us. It's exciting to see this going on.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And Miss Wilson, you are up next.
You guys hear me?
Yes.
So good evening, Chair, Mrs. and Dr. Felder. I am excited to be here with you and to share plans to bring back a small group of students at New Hope Elementary for academic support. This evening, I have with me the fabulous Mrs. Cheryl Mitchell, who is one of our amazing and dedicated resource exceptional children's teachers at New Hope. Ms. Mitchell is also the chair for our EC department, and she is here to share plans on behalf of her entire team. So at this time, I will turn it over to Mrs. Mitchell so that you can hear more about the small group plans that we have in the works at New Hope.
Good evening, and thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share further details about our request for academic small groups at New Hope. Approval of this request provides students an opportunity to attend school in person each Friday from 9:30 to 11 during their asynchronous learning day. Students can expect direct instruction in reading, writing, and math, as well as support to overcome anxiety or confusion that is associated with the changes in the school environment and routine when they return in late January or February for hybrid learning. Students selected to attend the in-person sessions will all have a current IEP. There are also students who are struggling to make appropriate progress toward IEP goals in the online setting. They may have limited resources and struggle with changes to their routine or schedule. Allowing these students the opportunity to attend in-person learning on Friday provides them time to learn safety protocols in a small, well-supported group. They will also receive lunch to take home, school supplies, books that they can hold and read, and other resources such as clothing or shoes as needed. All of the students selected have chosen hybrid learning for the third quarter of school. 3 teachers in the EC department at New Hope have submitted a request for small group learning. The 4th teacher wants to observe the small groups in a mentor teacher's classroom and then begin a group in her room as well. The teachers participating in the small groups will have a chance to practice with the new pieces of technology and be ready to support colleagues in January. The students will also be role models for the school and could potentially be the stars of the show when videos of the school procedures are filmed or students are chosen to model appropriate behavior. What a great opportunity for these students. In closing, many students are very successful in the remote learning environment and some are even thriving. However, there are other students who struggle daily with remote learning. Many of these students don't have an adult at home to support them with logging into class on time or completing assignments. They may also have continued internet or connectivity issues, and some are struggling with serious anxiety or depression and need the support of a live teacher on their team. We ask that you please consider granting our request for these academic small groups to support this population of students at New Hope Elementary.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mitchell and Ms. Wilson. We really appreciate seeing this. Mr. Mitchell, can I ask you to mute, please? And now we will move to Dr. Ramirez.
Hi, good evening, Board Chair McKenzie, Vice Chair Stevens, Dr. Felder, and team. Glad to be here. With me tonight, I brought 2 of my fabulous teachers. New to our school is Aaron Mitchell. He's a furniture making and woodworking teacher, and also Erin Bradley. She's our media specialist, and she teaches this section of yearbook this year. And at the end of my quick overview here, they will share their experience. So we're going to have many students come back. I don't know exactly how many, but they're going to come back beginning December 9th in small groups. We have basically 2 programs depending on priority and need. As the slide shows, it's pretty self-explanatory, but really the 2 programs will run Monday through Thursday and then Fridays only, depending on the need, the teacher schedule, and what it's going to take to get our kids over the finish line, those who need additional support. Teachers are volunteering to do this, and we're excited to begin. We have dedicated staff members that are working hard, and many are eager for students to return in small groups. And let's move to Ms. Bradley. Ms. Bradley can share with us her experience bringing in a few groups of students. Ms. Bradley?
We cannot hear you, Ms. Bradley. We need to send Mr. Bowman's child over to your house.
Okay, how about Mr. Mitchell?
Sorry, Ms. Bradley.
All right, I was like, it's likely microphone input. I had the same issue earlier today. So thank you for having me. I am coming in fresh this year. This is my first year teaching, so this is quite the ride. But I have been able to get some students in, thankfully with the support of Ms. Braxton, and also Dr. Ramirez. So I have a really ideal situation with an advanced class of woodworking students. There's only 5 students in the class. One has unfortunately not been at school for any of his classes for most of the semester. But for the 4 that have been there, it was a good small group to kind of come in and test the wood shop. And one of the things that makes the wood shop a little bit unique is a little bit of issue with sanitation. So lots of loose material, metal tables that we can't put sanitizer on, things like that. So what we've been doing is we had those students come in for the last 2 Fridays and just practice social distancing, doing their mask wearing, and they had a ball. I mean, I had a student that was working on a project and I said, hey, would you mind maybe, organizing that part of the wood rack? And he spent an hour and a half organizing a wood rack and was on top of the world. So it was very satisfying to see them just come into the shop, really enjoy being in there and have the chance to do that. I think that continuing to do small groups like that would be very, very beneficial for a lot of the students who are looking for something that is just miles away from the online world that we're in right now. Being able to get their hands on something and use something that's very physical, I think would be very beneficial. So as of now, the small group, I think, has been successful. I think with the 3 Ws that have been implemented very effectively, that will be a continued successful method for bringing students in, really getting them to engage.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Red Wolves. We appreciate hearing about this opportunity. Ms. Cremens, I think that you are our next presenter.
Yes, so good evening, Board Chair, Vice Chair, Dr. Felder, and the listening community. Before I begin with our next phase of bringing in some of our special education students, I wanted to thank our separate setting teachers and staff and everyone who has supported their return to school. As we bring in more students, I want to just make sure that we do not forget that they were first and that they paved the way for all of the hard work that is going into bringing small groups. So again, thank you, staff of our separate settings and our pre-K teachers. So building on what Ms. Mitchell had said, there are some groups of students in our Exceptional Children's Program that remote learning is difficult. And so in the next phase, the occupational course of study students, our therapeutic classes, and students who receive more than 20% of their day pulled out of the general education. These students are the next wave of special education students who will be returning to the building. This phase will begin on December 9th with teachers returning the week prior. Central service staff will work closely with schools to determine the length of the day based on which students choose to return. The occupational course of study and the therapeutic classes will return for at least 4 hours to begin with and will increase to the full school day. Much like the process when the current students return, the same process will be followed. Determine which students will return, determine the transportation routes and needs, make sure that PPE is delivered to classes as well as the sanitation supplies, provide professional development on the PPE and the sanitation supplies, and then problem solve specific student situations or class situations as they arise. So that is the plan for bringing in the next group of special education students. And thank you for your support and your time.
Thank you so much, Ms. Cremens. I just want to, well, Ms. Smiley, I see your hand up, so I'll call on you first.
Okay, and I know that we are running short on time. I'm curious about the Cedar Ridge program for students who are struggling in the remote learning context, sort of how many kids that is, and really if there is more opportunity or if we envision more of that happening at more schools. So that idea of like there's a small subset of kids who are really struggling at home, and whatever Cedar Ridge is doing to get them into the building starting in December, I'm wondering if we have plans to do more of that in more schools.
So what I can tell you is that it is a capacity consideration. And so each school continues to evaluate their, where they are with regards to capacity to bring in small groups. So hopefully, as the weeks go on, we hope to be able to bring in more school students across all schools, but it comes down to capacity. And so again, the ultimate goal is to bring in more students, and schools will continue to reevaluate their ability to do so.
So I just want, what I was going to say is that I am really appreciative of the schools that have brought us plans that we were able to see tonight. And I just want to extend the deep gratitude from the board to all of our schools, because we know even schools that weren't presenting plans tonight are deep into the work, addressing the needs of their students and doing so in their own way and with what is appropriate for their groups. So thank you from the board to all of our schools for all of your hard work during this time. And I see Ms. Hauser, and then we will pass it to Ms. Stowe.
Yeah, and I just want to, reiterate or reinforce this point on how exciting it is to see what's happening in our schools. So thank you so much, Dr. Felder. Thank you so much to your team for making this happen. And I just want to say, if there's anything that the board could do, including providing additional funding or additional resources to do more of this, please come to us, because this is the best board meeting subject ever since I've been on the board, so thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Stowe?
Good evening, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, and board members. Ms. Hauser, could not agree more. We are so excited to see our students back and so appreciative of the efforts of our staff, and that runs across the board in bringing back our EC separate settings, preschool, our supervised learning labs, and these small groups. It's really exciting. And that won't stop, but we are looking forward to January 25th, the start of the second semester, when families have the opportunity to sign up for their children to either come back hybrid in person under Plan B, or to opt for one of the virtual academy offerings. So this Thursday, all of our families will receive an opportunity, an invitation to sign up for Plan B. This will not be due until the 23rd. We want to give them time to reflect and think, but we also have several informational sessions at the district level. Our schools have also coordinated a number, we'll be coordinating sessions as well. And these will center around the virtual academy offerings, which we've discussed, but we want to make sure they are aware of those. And also the safety measures that we have in place for Plan B for those who do return in person. These sessions will be broadcast simultaneously in 4 languages. So we're very excited about that. And we also have on our website a new return to school under Plan B link that includes a lot of the information you've heard and everything that we think families will need to know. And on the next slide, yeah, there we are. And so I want to also reiterate, we've had several surveys where we've asked families and staff to help give us some guidance. We appreciate that. We appreciate that more than they know. This is not a survey. This is a sign up. This is an opportunity. Every family has to sign up. And again, the due date's the 23rd. It's coming out this Thursday. And we encourage families, if they have questions beyond what our information sessions and website, everything will be on YouTube, again, translated in all the languages for our families, Korean, Burmese, Spanish, and English. But if they have questions, reach out to your teachers, your principal, anyone at the school, reach out, because we need you to make a well-informed decision that is in the best interest of, sorry, I'm doing like PSA, but we want them to reach out and make a decision that makes the most sense and is most comfortable for what they need academically and from a health and safety standpoint for their families and their children. Anyway, we're really excited about this opportunity. Can't wait, Ms. Hauser and everyone else, to have more meetings like this where we can see our students back safely and learning.
Thank you so much, Ms. Stowe. Are there questions, feedback from the board? All right. We actually have two things. Oh, okay. We are actually going to move on to the last item on our agenda, which is to discuss Dr. Felder's contract extension, which is what the board discussed in closed session this evening. So do I have a motion, Mr. Atherton?
So motion to extend Dr. Felder's contract to 2023 and a bonus of $10K for outstanding performance this year.
Second.
Who was the second from?
Brenda Stevens.
I have a motion from Mr. Atherton and a second from Ms. Stevens. Ms. Doyle?
Yes.
Ms. Hauser?
Yes.
I vote yes. Ms. Moore?
Yes.
Ms. Smiley?
Yes.
Ms. Stevens?
Yes.
Mr. Atherton?
Yes.
Okay, well, that motion passes unanimously and enthusiastically. Thank you, Dr. Felder, so much for all of your incredibly hard work this year. We're so grateful to you. And I have made a mistake, which is that we are going to do item number 4 on our agenda. So we're going to jump back to the data sharing agreement with Duke for the ABC Science Collaborative.
Thank you, and I think I can address this pretty briefly. This is Eva. This is just an addendum to our ABC Collaborative Agreement that allows use of the app for health screenings. Duke will be, and Dr. Dawson, are you still on? So Dr. Dawson can jump in as well as far as the purposes of the app, but it's an app that parents can use to do the health screening instead of messing with a form every morning, and we hope it will make the check-in process and transportation process easier. And the data that's collected will be used in a de-identified, anonymous format by the district to track trends, and also by the ABC Collaborative. And so this is the detailed agreement that our office drafted along with Duke to allow us, legally under FERPA to transmit that data back and forth.
Well, Madam Chair, I move that we approve this document.
Is this something that we need to vote on, Ms. Jubison?
I think the superintendent was hoping for board approval just because it is, something that'll be in one use.
Second.
Okay, great. We have a motion from Ms. Stevens. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second from Mr. Atherton. Ms. Doyle?
Yes.
Ms. Hauser?
Yes.
I vote yes. Ms. Moore?
Yes.
Ms. Smiley?
Yes.
Ms. Stevens?
Yes.
Mr. Atherton?
Yes.
Motion approved. Thank you, everyone, for a great board meeting. I'm so grateful that we got through our entire agenda. Are there any closing thoughts or feedback from any board members or staff members before we adjourn?
Madam Chair, motion to adjourn.
Second.
I have a motion from Ms. Stevens and a second from Ms. Smiley. Mr. Atherton?
Yes.
Ms. Doyle?
Yes.
Ms. Hauser?
Yes.
I vote yes. Ms. Moore?
Yes.
Ms. Smiley?
Yes.
Ms. Stevens?
Yes.
We are adjourned. Thank you all so much. Have a great night.